words, Joanna, I can retire while I'm ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, and this is a great opportunity for me to share with you my views. My views about common goals of Israel and the Jews in diaspora. And I know that we have different opinions on different issues, but I think that the basic idea is to find the common ground, the common denominator between Israel and between the Jews in diaspora. I believe that we all share common challenges, unfortunately in a way. It is clear now that the world is being divided between extremists and moderates. Israel is part of the free world led by the United States of America that needs to meet the challenge of extremism, that needs to fight terrorism, and we have, unfortunately, in this region, different examples for a state that expresses this extreme religious ideology like Iran. We have Hezbollah in Lebanon, we have Hamas in the Palestinian Authority, and this is and should be a common goal of the free world. As Jews, we need to meet the challenge, the threat, the phenomena of anti-Semitism. And I also believe that this is and this should be the goal and the challenge of different leaders of the international community. This is not a Jewish problem. This is a problem of the communities in which anti-Semitism rises its ugly head. And for a fact, in the last few months, we showed that when we lead something, we can recruit the international community, and Durban 2 was a great example to a situation in which Israel plus other states in the world can fight together this phenomena, even though it was initiated by the United Nations. And of course, as Jews and Israelis, we all need to meet the ongoing challenge since the establishment of the State of Israel 61 years ago, and this is the existence of the State of Israel. Now, it is clear that since the creation of the State of Israel, Israel is still fighting for its existence. But we need to understand that Israel is homeland for the Jewish people and the democracy. But the reason that Israel is not being accepted in this region is not only because Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but because Israel is the only Jewish state in the world. And it's not enough to fight for the physical existence of the State of Israel. This is crucial, this is essential, goes without saying. This is the responsibility of any leadership, to keep the state, or to keep the interests of the state, and to keep the state secured state in the Middle East. But it is not less important to keep and secure the values of Israel as homeland for the Jewish people. I believe that the ultimate goal of Israel and the entire Jewish communities is to have Israel keeping its values as homeland for the Jewish people and the democracy, living together and not in contradiction, a secured state in the land of Israel. This is the reason that I do believe that the idea and the translation of this idea into a peace treaty of two nation state is an Israeli interest. This is the only way for us to keep Israel values as homeland for the Jewish people and democracy, in an understanding that we are going to have more Aliyah in the future, but in an understanding that we need a Jewish majority in Israel. We need to give up some of the land that I truly believe that the Jewish people has the right, biblical, judicial, moral rights on the entire land. But since my ultimate goal is to keep Israel as a state, sovereign state, Jewish and democracy and a democratic state, we need to give up part of the land, because without it, we can lose the raison d'etre, or the reason for Israel's survival as a Jewish state. This is the reason that I believe this is an Israeli interest. This is the reason that I believe that stagnation is not an option. And I was glad to hear that other parts of Israel, politicians or political parties, came to this conclusion, even though I would be happier to know that they came to the same understanding, not by pressure coming from the outside, by a true understanding that this represents truly and really the interest of Israel itself. But I'm not going to speak about this. This is something... This is just the highlights. Say no more. It is not less important to speak today and to have a common understanding what does the words homeland for the Jewish people means. And we have differences on this. It is easy to say Jewish and democratic state, and when it comes to democracy, well, everybody knows what does it mean. There are a lot of democracies in the world. Any Israeli kid being asked know how to quote, I think, parts of the American Constitution, because they see all these movies and sitcoms and everything here. But at the end of the day, when we ask, what does it mean, a Jewish state? It is more than differences. This is lack of common understanding that creates here more and more communities that cannot share the same vision. And I believe that the role of leaders is to create a vision and to have a consensus within the Israeli communities and between Israel and the Jews in diaspora about this common goal and understanding. Because this is the raison d'etre of the State of Israel. And if you ask some seculars in Tel Aviv, some of them would say that a Jewish state means forcing them to do something, being religious, something which is being represented in the Israeli parliament by ultra-Orthodox parties. If you ask some ultra-Orthodox kids, they would say something about the religiousness or being religious. If you ask Arab minorities, they would say something that the meaning of a Jewish state means something which is against their own equal rights. And I do believe that the values of Israel as a democracy is to express or to give any Israeli citizen equal rights. This is part of our responsibility. This is part of our values. It's not a favor that we are giving to the Palestinians who are equal rights Israeli citizens, even though, as was said before, the idea of two-state solution means that the only national solution is in the Palestinian state and not in Israel. But this is the difference between national demands and equal rights as citizens. And we need to have this common goal because when time passes, we have a situation in which Israel becomes more and more Israeli, in a way less and less Jewish, especially when it comes to young generation. And I don't know whether, and maybe this is also an understatement, when we are talking about the children in the Jewish communities abroad, I don't know what is their relation, connection, and understanding about Israel. And I have this feeling that what was obvious in 1948 and maybe the years after the creation of the State of Israel is not obvious anymore. And anyway, part of our responsibility is to make it clear in Israel. This is something that belongs to education that we need to give in each and every school in Israel, not in just parts of the schools in Israel. And this is something, this is also your responsibility to do it with young generations abroad in order to have this common goal is something which is obvious and not something that we are facing this kind of erosion. The way I see the Jewish state is the following, and I'll try to show with you what does it mean to me, Israel as a Jewish state. What is my Jewish state, in a way? I believe that this is something that represents the values of Israel, not in terms of religion, but in terms of nationality. I believe that the first article of the future constitution of Israel, and I think that Israel needs a constitution, but this is another debate. The first article in the future constitution of Israel is the law of return. It means, of course, as you know, that every Jew comes to Israel, becomes an Israeli citizen, a moment in which he lands in Ben Gurion airport. This is not enough. We faced a huge, a dramatic aliyah coming from former Soviet Union, and we have you today, blessed, that contributed to the state of Israel in many different terms, something which is according to our values as Zionists. But we have here about 300,000 people that came to Israel according to the law of return. They have the right to come to Israel and to be Israeli citizens, but the difficulties that they have, those who want to join the Jewish people, the problems that they have in terms of conversion is something which is not acceptable. And we tried in my former also capacity as the Minister for Immigrant Absorption, and this was also the idea of Arik Sharon as a Prime Minister, to try and ease the process for those who want to be not only Israelis, but part of the Jewish people. And what I see and hear today, and also today in Haaretz newspaper, that some of the rabbis tries to make it harder, this is something that we need to object. And at the end of the day, you know, when I raised this issue, and I raised this issue also in the parliament with other representatives of other parties, of ultra-Orthodox parties, and I told them that for me it is more important, maybe even in comparison to them, because they live in small and close communities. And we are those who are living together, embracing this Aliyah coming to Israel, and I want them to be part of something that I feel related to. And when I raised this issue with other parts of Israel society, some of them told me, listen, this is not important. At the end of the day, they become Jews. And I said, how is that? And they said, no, they are going to school, they speak Hebrew, they are going to the army, they join the army. This is something which is very Israeli. But this is far... The gap between this and between the real essence and understanding, being part of the Jewish people, is huge. And speaking Hebrew and joining the army, this is something which is very Israeli, but excuse me, this is not the common denominator between us and between the Jews in diaspora. And this is the reason why we need to do something that relates to our history, to our tradition, to all these symbols that connects us. And then we have my Israel as a Jewish state is also symbols. The anthem, Atikva, the flag with the Magen David, the menorah, the parliament in Jerusalem. Saturday, Shabbat, as something which is special and not just another day. Something that relates also to Yom Kippur and to Passover, to Pesach. Something that doesn't force anybody to do something in his home, but something that relates to public places. Because I want my children to have this sense of something special in Shabbat, in Yom Kippur, in Passover, even though, God, excuse me, I hope, I am not keeping all the mitzvahs as I should. But we are losing something also on this that was obvious when I was young. And when my kids, and they still come with me in Yom Kippur to synagogue, but they are the only one from their class coming to the synagogue, this is something that we are losing. Because being a Jew is not something that somebody tells you. It's about your feeling. It's about the prayer, the music. And this is something that we need to give them this sense of, or this feeling of being Jewish. We need to do it here, and this is something also that needs to be done, of course, in other communities abroad. I also believe that when it comes to Israel as a Jewish state, And as long as we have, of course, this ongoing conflict, which is also a conflict not only, but also a conflict about land, I believe that the state, the government of Israel, should keep its controls on the lands of Israel. I completely against the privatization of the land, giving it to private hands. And believe me, I was in charge when Netanyahu was the prime minister. I was in charge of privatization. I was the general manager of the government companies authority. And I am the one who is going to join or lead any reform which is against bureaucracy, because this is a disease that we need to deal with. But there is a gap between dealing with the problems in the Israeli Land Authority, in Minal Mekarkei Israel, in terms of bureaucracy, and giving the responsibility and the keys to the future of the lands of Israel to private hands. In the past, I raised before the issue of Aliyah coming from former Soviet unions in the past. And this was the government who established new places for them to be absorbed. I was the one who sat with people from Gush Katif, from Gaza Strip, after the evacuation, after the decision of the disengagement plan, in an understanding that they want to live in communities. It's not just paying a check, hoping for good, but they want to live in communities. And this is the responsibility of a government to plan and to build and to help and to be in charge on all of this. This is the reason that when it comes to new reforms coming from the Israeli government, when it comes to fighting bureaucracy, I'm the one who's going to join it. But when it comes to giving the land to private hands, I'm totally against it. Because at the end of the day, Israel is not just a piece of land. And when it comes to all these aspects of Israel, this is not about real estate. It's about us. It's about the future of the state of Israel. It's about the reason for its existence. And I just took this opportunity to share with you what is my Jewish state, which I believe this is also your Jewish state, as homeland for the Jewish people forever.